Germany's zombie hoods are out of control. And it's starting to look worse than America. Clean platforms, commuters moving, storefronts open, then bodies slumped and stalled right in the station flow. Officials apply pressure. The scene scatters, and the same corridor refills like gravity never changed. This doesn't stay over there. It spreads along the exact corridors you use: the station entrance, the underpass, the shortcut to work. And there's one trigger that decides when your street gets hit next. Most people spot it only after the scene is already in their path.
One night on the streets, it will damage your physical health, but certainly your mental health.
Germany public collapse zones. A German city can run efficiently and still have one corridor where federal law, local enforcement, housing pressure, and addiction collide at the same address. That collision is what I mean by a public collapse zone. It is not a slogan. It is the point where a crisis stops being hidden and starts being unavoidable. You feel it in the contrast before you can explain it. Commuters moving with purpose, storefronts open, platforms clean, and then bodies that look like they are running out of power in real time. Some people sway, some people freeze, some people fold forward as if gravity doubled. The look makes clips travel fast because it feels like a rupture in a place that promises order. In Germany right now, you often do not see one substance. You see mixes, stimulants and sedatives, alcohol and exhaustion, sometimes layered on top of untreated mental illness and weeks of fragmented sleep. Different chemistry, similar collapse. The street starts to look like a medical ward with no walls, and the public does not know where to place its anger. The mistake is assuming the whole city looks like the clip. Concentration turns a smaller problem into a bigger image. A public collapse zone can be one corridor and still feel like a national emergency because the corridor sits inside normal life. That is why the shock lands hard here. The surrounding environment still works, so the failure looks deliberate even when it is structural. Germany covers you on paper. The street still wins on speed. If access moves at paperwork speed and the crisis moves at street speed, the street becomes the place where collapse is processed, not because anyone chose it as a plan, but because it is the only system open all day. And once collapse is visible, the public instinct is simple. Make it stop, make it move, make it look normal again. That instinct is human, but the way a city answers it decides whether the public collapse zone shrinks or whether it becomes a moving target that spreads fear into new neighborhoods. The station corridor effect. Stations become magnets because they concentrate foot traffic, and foot traffic feeds everything else. Picture a corridor built for work with thousands of strangers passing each other every hour. Picture the edges of that movement where you can linger without standing out. Picture the corners where you can watch who is coming and the exits where you can disappear fast. In a station corridor, opportunity is constant. Small transactions only work when there is a steady stream of people. The corridor keeps the street economy alive because the street economy can hide inside ordinary movement. In a station corridor, anonymity is also constant. Crowds where nobody knows your name and nobody checks your story. That can protect someone in crisis from immediate confrontation, but it can also protect the worst actors, the people who exploit vulnerability and vanish into the flow. In a station corridor, services cluster for practical reasons. Outreach wants to reach people. Clinics want to be reachable. Low-threshold doors are placed where transport is easiest. These services can keep people alive, but they also create gravity, and gravity concentrates the public collapse zone. That is the paradox that drives so much anger. The city tries to keep people alive, and the visible crisis becomes more concentrated. Residents read that concentration as tolerance. Advocates read it as realism. Both sides are reacting to the same gravity. Germany is rail-heavy. The station corridor is not a side street. It is the front door. That makes the collision feel personal. A commuter is not reading about addiction in a report. A commuter is stepping past it on the way to work. The social contract feels broken in the same place where the country advertises order. The station corridor does not create the crisis. The station corridor corridor reveals it, and when a crisis is revealed in the front door, politics does not respond with patience. But before we go deeper, I want to say this clearly. Nobody in this story is disposable. Not residents, not commuters, not the people stuck in collapse. If you value coverage that holds both truths, subscribe and drop a like. Why it feels louder in Germany. Germany expects order. Shared space is supposed to work. Schedules hold. Rules matter. That is part of what makes daily life possible. So when a public collapse zone forms, it feels like a betrayal of the promise. People do not only see suffering, they see a breach. They think, if the rules can fail here, what else is failing that I cannot see? Germany also carries a tension that makes the debate sharper. The country has a harm reduction tradition that treats addiction as a health issue, but it also has an order instinct that treats public disorder as unacceptable. Those instincts collide inside the station corridor, because the station corridor is the most public kind of public space, and because Germany is federal, the pressure does not flow cleanly to one decision maker. Cities carry the heat, but states shape policing frameworks. Health and social services run through multiple layers. Housing supply moves on timelines that do not match the news cycle. When power is distributed, urgency can dilute, and the station corridor becomes the place where gaps meet. Now the loop begins. It has a German accent, but the rhythm is the same. Pressure, scatter, return. Pressure, scatter, return is what happens when a human crisis is treated as a visibility problem. First comes pressure. More patrols, more checks, more disruption of dealing corners, more removals of people who linger. The station corridor looks calmer, and the public feels relief. Shops breathe. Headlines soften. Politicians point to action. Then comes scatter. People do not disappear. They move. They shift into side streets, underpasses, stairwells, and parks. They fragment into smaller groups, which spreads conflict across more addresses. New neighborhoods feel the crisis arrive and panic fast. Then comes return. The original station corridor refills because gravity never disappeared. Services are still nearby. Foot traffic is still nearby. Anonymity is still nearby. The network is still nearby. The map snaps back, and now the people inside the scene are more exhausted and more distrustful. The public concludes nothing works. For the people inside the loop, pressure, scatter, return is not an abstract debate. It is a daily survival tax. It is walking farther to find a place to sit. It is losing contact with outreach because you moved. It is using faster because you have to hide. It is delaying help because visibility feels dangerous. For the public, pressure, scatter, return produces the most viral footage. The scene becomes more chaotic, more unpredictable, and therefore more shareable. The internet punishes nuance and rewards panic, which pushes the city back toward visible control. The loop also creates a domino effect. Once one neighborhood gets enforcement, the next demands equal treatment, then the next. Soon the city shifts from a targeted response to a broader posture that sounds like no lingering anywhere and no sleeping anywhere. The rules tighten, but the math stays. And when the math stays, the visible suffering does not end. It only changes shape. Sometimes it becomes less concentrated and more scattered. Sometimes it becomes more hidden and more dangerous. Either way, pressure without exits rarely produces stability. Now let us make this concrete with a scene drop. Then we return to the mechanism. A scene drop that makes the contrast hit. Picture a station district where global business is visible in the skyline and wealth is minutes away on foot, but the street scene sits right at the front door. That is why Frankfurt am Main hits so hard. The public collapse zone feels incompatible with the surrounding success, so the footage feels like proof that something is broken. In that kind of corridor, the machine is clear. The station corridor concentrates foot traffic. Foot traffic supports dealing and panhandling. Services cluster nearby because that is where people can be reached. People in crisis gather because the corridor is where survival is immediate. Concentration raises complaints. Complaints raise enforcement. Pressure. Enforcement pressure creates churn. Churn makes behavior more chaotic. Chaos creates fear. Fear demands more pressure. Frankfurt has long experience combining harm reduction with enforcement, which means the city has tools and history. But tools without enough capacity still lead to the same loop. If supervised spaces are full or far or closed when the street is active, the street wins. If treatment entry is slow, the corridor remains the only immediate network. If housing exits are scarce, gravity remains. A station district is also a reputation machine. One strip of pavement can define the whole city for people who have never been there. When reputation becomes the story, leaders feel forced to show control. Showing control often means showing pressure, and pressure often means pressure. Scatter, return. Now the human logic. Why people keep coming back to the corridor even when help exists, even when the public is screaming for the scene to stop. Why the corridor still wins. From the outside, it looks like a choice. Why not leave? Why not take the help? Why not go somewhere safer? From the inside, it often looks like a trade. If you leave the corridor, you lose the network you rely on. You lose the outreach worker who knows your face. You lose the toilet you can reach. You lose the warm corner where you can rest without being chased every minute. You lose the familiarity that reduces certain risks, even if it increases others. Services can exist and still be unreachable in practice. Coverage does not automatically become access. Entry points can require stability. A phone that works. Identification that is not lost. Appointments kept on time. Forms completed. Rules followed. For someone living in crisis, missing one step can reset the whole process. The street does not reset. The street is always open. The corridor becomes the only consistent routine in a life where everything else is unstable. It is immediate, it is social, it is predictable. In a strange way, even the risks become familiar, and familiar risks can feel safer than unknown ones. This is also why the zombie label misleads. It suggests the people are mindless. In reality, most of the behavior is rational inside a broken set of options. People return to what they know because what they know is what still exists. Now add the current street chemistry. In Germany right now, you often see a polysubstance era, not a single drug story. That matters because it changes the texture of the corridor. The polysubstance street reality. The internet wants one explanation, one villain, one substance, one policy mistake. Street reality is messy. In a public collapse zone, you can see stimulant looping, sedative shutdown, alcohol haze, and raw exhaustion inside the same hour. You can also see the psychological weight of constant vigilance. People sleeping outdoors do not sleep deeply. They nap in fragments and stay alert for threats. The body eventually looks like it is, shutting down even when the person is trying to survive. The mix makes behavior unpredictable. Someone can be agitated and pacing, then frozen and slumped, then suddenly moving again. That unpredictability increases fear and conflict. It also increases emergency calls. Emergency calls increase political heat. Political heat increases pressure. The loop tightens. The mix also makes help harder to access. Someone who cannot keep track of appointments or paperwork can still find the station corridor every day. The corridor becomes the default system because it does not require stability to enter. Coverage is not the same as a pathway that works for the least stable person. Now, Germany does not only have station corridors. It has parks and public squares, and when the scene moves there, the debate turns symbol heavy. This is where the city stops arguing about what works and starts arguing about what kind of society it wants to be. When the hotspot becomes a symbol. In a station corridor, people can tell themselves it is part of transit life. It is ugly, but it is contained. In a park, people feel robbed. A park is supposed to be rest. A park is supposed to be family. So when a public collapse zone attaches to a park, the reaction becomes moral, not only practical. In Berlin, politics around places like Görlitzer Park shows how fast this becomes a symbol fight. The city is not only managing a crisis, the city is managing a story. One side says harm reduction is realism. The other side says order is non-negotiable. Both sides talk past each other because they are arguing about identity, not only outcomes. Picture this: a park edge at dusk. People who came for fresh air now walking faster, eyes scanning, phones out, not to film, but to feel safe. You hear the same argument in different voices. Someone says, fence it and end it. Someone says, the fence just pushes it outward. Someone says, why are we even debating this in a country with health coverage? Underneath, all of that is the same mechanical truth. If the city only changes where people can be, without changing where people can go, pressure, scatter, return will simply pick a new address. Physical control becomes attractive because it looks decisive. Fences, gates, restricted hours, stronger patrol presence. These measures can change the map. They can reduce certain behaviors inside the boundary. They can satisfy residents who want a visible sign the city is responding. But pressure, scatter, return routes around boundaries. It routes into surrounding streets. It routes into stairwells. It routes into the next corridor where complaints take longer to form. That is how a city can calm one symbol space and still feel worse overall. The danger is that symbol solutions become addictive. They deliver a visual win, and visual wins are politically rewarding. But if the city does not build exits, the win is temporary. The crisis returns, or the crisis reappears somewhere else, and people feel betrayed again. Now broaden the lens. Frankfurt is the clearest example of the station corridor effect, but it is not the only place where the ingredients overlap. The pattern repeats anywhere foot traffic, services, and dealing overlap, and that is why people start saying the crisis is everywhere. The pattern repeats beyond one city. You have seen this layout even if you have never been there. A major station, a shopping street, a corridor of services, a few corners where lingering is possible, a few underpasses where visibility drops, a steady flow of commuters who cannot avoid seeing what is happening. In cities like Hamburg, the station corridor becomes the stage in the same way. The names change. The ingredients stay. When the ingredients stay, the public collapse zone forms and the loop begins. This is also where the comparison with the United States becomes tricky. Germany can look worse on camera because the scene is concentrated in the front door corridor. In the United States, the worst suffering is often dispersed and private. It can be deadlier while being less visible to the average commuter. So the honest question is not which country is more moral. The honest question is which country is more visible. Germany is a visibility amplifier. That makes the politics hotter because more people encounter the crisis directly. Visibility can also be an advantage if it forces action, but acting can mean building capacity, or acting can mean playing the map game. Now we get practical. Germany has tools. The argument is about balance and scale. Reduce deaths, reduce public collapse, remove gravity. Solutions are not vibes. Solutions are capacity. What actually works at scale? First, reduce deaths. Scale supervised capacity to real demand and real hours. Enough staffed places, close enough to compete with the street, open when the street is active. You will notice fewer ambulances, fewer collapses in the open, and fewer medical emergencies turning into tragedy. Second, reduce public collapse. Treatment has to move at street speed, not paperwork speed. Low threshold entry. Same-day pathways where possible. Immediate starts where medically appropriate. Outreach that keeps contact even when someone relapses. You will notice less looping, less crisis cycling, fewer people stuck in the station corridor from morning to night. Third, remove gravity. Housing exits and storage remove the corridor pull. Housing first-style placements for the highest churn group shrink the visible scene faster than crackdowns because they remove repeat exposure. Storage matters because people refuse services when they fear losing everything they own. Where feasible, keeping partners together and allowing pets removes quiet barriers that keep people on the street. You will notice the public collapse zone shrinking, not just moving. This is not tolerating disorder. It is reducing collapse and shared space by building the capacity that competes with the street. Bridge services matter. A person in crisis may not be able to jump from the street into perfect compliance. Bridge services give a safe place to stabilize, a place to shower, a place to store belongings, and a place to sleep without being chased. People notice the difference because the night stops being a fight and the day stops being a loop. Mental health response must be embedded too. In a public collapse zone, not every crisis is intoxication. Some people are psychotic, terrified, or dissociated. If the first response is only enforcement, the corridor becomes more volatile. If crisis care is attached to outreach, the corridor can become less explosive even before housing exits catch up. Enforcement still matters, but the target matters. Focus on exploitation, violence, coercion, trafficking, and predatory dealing patterns. Reduce the worst harms without turning survival into a constant chase that feeds pressure, scatter, return. Now we talk about why solutions stall, even in a country that knows what the tools are. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable because it is not only about budgets, it is about tolerance, coordination, and housing supply. Why solutions stall even when the tools exist. Capacity is expensive in the short term, and politics loves short-term optics. Supervised spaces can be controversial because they concentrate visible disorder near the service site even when they reduce deaths. That creates local backlash that can freeze expansion. People support saving lives in theory and reject the facility near them in practice. Treatment capacity can stall because systems are built for organized clients, when the people who need help most are the least able to navigate the process. The process needs redesign, not only funding. That redesign is slow. It requires coordination across agencies that do not naturally cooperate. Housing exits stall for the oldest reason in city life. Not enough affordable units, not enough supportive housing, long planning timelines, neighborhood resistance. When housing is scarce, every program becomes a waiting room. Safe options become temporary. Temporary options become crowded. Crowding pushes people back into the station corridor. Federalism adds friction too. Cities are the face of the crisis because the crisis is visible on their sidewalks. But cities do not control every lever that shapes policing, health access, and housing rules. When accountability is shared, urgency can dilute. Meanwhile, the station corridor does not wait. It fills every day, so the country can end up doing a little of everything and not enough of anything. The public collapse zone barely shrinks, and the public sees the effort as failure. That is why the scoreboard matters. You need measures that cannot be faked by clearing one block. The scoreboard that ends the arguments. Deaths trending down. Emergency calls trending down. Housing exits trending up. Follow-up contact trending up. Those four measures tell you whether a city is reducing collapse or just relocating it. A city can clear one corner and claim progress, but if emergency calls stay high and housing exits stay flat, it is still pressure, scatter, return. A corridor can still look messy while improving if deaths fall and exits rise. There is also a street-level signal people feel before the statistics. You see fewer sudden collapses in the middle of walkways. You see fewer repeat loops of the same people all day because they have somewhere else to go. You see fewer conflicts sparked by pure exhaustion. The corridor feels less like a stage and more like a place people pass through. Germany is not out of tools, it is out of scale. If leaders choose pressure, scatter, return, the public collapse zone keeps moving and the footage keeps coming from new angles. If leaders choose capacity, the station corridor stops being the default overflow, and the scene can shrink instead of relocating. This isn't just a headline, it's a pattern, and it only gets worse when cities chase optics instead of exits. So what do you think works first? Pressure, treatment, or housing pathways? Drop your answer in the comments. If you want more grounded breakdowns like this, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you next one.